We've made it to 100 videos. Welcome back to Crawford-Clark Close-Up, and for this special video on the channel I'm going to be taking you on a journey through some of my favourite movies. This is not an exhaustive list, just 100 of my favourites, and they're in no particular order of favourites except alphabetically. Please remember that this list is entirely subjective. I'm not debating that these are the best films of all time, merely that these are films I enjoy watching for whatever reason. You'll notice that some of the films on this list I've already reviewed on the channel, but there are plenty more featured here that I'll get round to reviewing later down the line. I also won't be spending long talking about each film. There's 100, so it would be a horrendously long video otherwise. Let me know in the comments below how many of the 100 here you enjoy watching too, and don't forget to subscribe to Crawford-Clark Close-Up at the top of the page so you don't miss out on any new content. Come and find us on Facebook and Twitter, and email crawfordclarkcloseup@gmail.com with any suggestions for future reviews on the channel. With that out of the way, let's get started. First up, we have the movie that christened this channel, Sidney Lumet's claustrophobic, highly engaging 1957 jury drama, 12 Angry Men. For visceral quality, Steve McQueen's Oscar-winning 12 Years a Slave is next, one of the most deserving of the Best Picture statuettes this decade. The first Stanley Kubrick movie on this list is the mesmerising A Clockwork Orange. Malcolm McDowell gives one of the finest performances of all time. One of the most recent films next, A Star is Born, ensures audiences that Lady Gaga could act, and act well. Next up is Richard Curtis's most confident film to date, About Time. Some great performances and a well-executed premise. One that I grew up with now, it's Harrison Ford versus Gary Oldman in the 90s action tour de force Air Force One. From 90s action to 80s comedy parody, it's Airplane, one of the most consistently funny films of all time. Next up is one of the very best from Disney Animation Studios, it's Aladdin. We'll be reviewing this next one before the end of the year as part of our celebration of Best Picture Oscar winners. It's Sam Mendes' mighty directorial debut, American Beauty. Next is a film I once watched for the first time about 5 years ago, and it resonated with me so much. It's the brilliant American History X. Next up, we have Jim, Finch, Oz, Kevin and Stifler as the hapless teens in one of the best coming-of-age comedies, American Pie. Still up there as one of the best from the MCU, it's Avengers Infinity War. Jennifer Kent's chilling feature film debut The Babadook is next on the list, an inspired directorial debut which we'll be reviewing come October for our next Halloween season. Contender for Best Movie of the 80s next with Back to the Future. Next is the inspiration for Suzanne Collins' Hunger Games series, Kinji Fukasaku's Bloody Battle Royale. Next up is a film due for review before the end of this year, 11 Oscar-winning Ben-Hur. With a who's who of British acting talent and stunning cinematography in India, it's The Best Exotic Marigold Hotel. Inarguably Tim Burton's most personal film and arguably his best, Big Fish. Divisive horror celebrating its 20th anniversary and one which we'll be reviewing in October this year, The Blair Witch Project. Another recent hit from 2018 with a standout lead performance from Rami Malek, it's the crowd-pleasing Bohemian Rhapsody. Mark Herman's brilliant adaptation of John Boyne's sombre novel Boy in the Striped Pyjamas is up next. Experimental hit Boyhood from 2014 is one of the best films of the last decade. One of the oldest films on this particular list containing the greatest Richard Attenborough performance, it's Brighton Rock. Now the first of the Bond films to make my list, it's Daniel Craig's blistering debut in the movie in the role of 007 in Casino Royale. Next up is the fantastic 2000 Aardman animation Chicken Run. The outstanding City Lights from Charlie Chaplin is the next film on this list. My favourite Pixar movie to date is 2017's beautiful Coco. One of my favourite films of 2018, the superb continuation of the Rocky saga with Creed 2. One of the biggest blockbusters of the 2000s next, and arguably the greatest superhero movie to date, it's the mighty Dark Knight. Next up is Neil Marshall's underrated claustrophobic horror The Descent. Yippee-ki-yay, one of the greatest action movies of all time, Die Hard. The second Bond film to feature on this list, another Bond actor debut, this time Sean Connery's first outing in Dr. No. One of the most consistently funny comedies of the 90s, Jim Carrey and Jeff Daniels goofing around in Dumb and Dumber. One of Steven Spielberg's best next, have the tissues handy for that ending, it's E.T. The final Tim Burton movie on this list, it's the brilliant Edward Scissorhands. The best Star Wars movie to date next, Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. Having watched this again last year for our Halloween reviews, I forgot just how good The Exorcist actually is. Next up, from Bond, James Bond is another of the best, the second film in the series, From Russia with Love. Jordan Peele's brilliant feature film debut making a star out of Daniel Kaluuya, it's Get Out. Ridley Scott's epic Best Picture winner Gladiator is next. One of the finest Stephen King adaptations for you next. Tom Hanks and Michael Clarke Duncan are electric, no pun intended, in The Green Mile. Again, tissues at the ready for that ending. Contender for Mel Gibson's most visceral film next, it's the excellent Hacksaw Ridge. John Carpenter's seminal 1978 classic Halloween is up next. And the next two entries on the list come from the Harry Potter franchise. My two favourites are the brilliant Half-Blood Prince and Prisoner of Azkaban. Ari Aster's vivid Hereditary is next on my favourites list. One of the very best festive flicks next, Merry Christmas, you filthy animal, it's Home Alone. Christopher Lee is the Count himself in the excellent Horror of Dracula from 1958. The best of the Cornetto trilogy, packed full of laughs and with a great cast, it's Hot Fuzz. The best output from DreamWorks Animation to date is the first in the How to Train Your Dragon series. Before The Haunting of Hill House and this year's Doctor Sleep, the sequel to The Shining, director Mike Flanagan brought us the superb Hush. The TV series was for the most part a solid adaptation, but Andy Muschietti's It Chapter 1 was a stellar adaptation of half of Stephen King's story, with top performances all round from the child actors. A pleasant surprise next, I caught up with In Bruges for the first time earlier this year. Having no idea what to expect, I found myself laughing throughout. Brendan Gleeson, Colin Farrell and Ralph Fiennes are an inspired trio. Christopher Nolan's mind-bending Inception is still arguably his strongest work to date. The first Tarantino movie on this list is 2009's Inglourious Basterds. Brilliant performances all round, but especially from the dazzling Christoph Waltz. It's a Wonderful Life could well be my favourite film of all time. James Stewart is dynamite as everyman George Bailey in this life-affirming drama. Next, we have the first film I ever saw in the cinemas when it was re-released in the early 90s. The original Jungle Book is essential Disney. Diablo Cody's screenplay sparkles, and Michael Cera and Ellen Page are perfect casting in the thoroughly engaging Juno. Another classic from Spielberg with effects that still hold up some 25 years down the line. It's the original and still the best Jurassic Park. Kill Bill Volume 1 is up next, just the first and stronger half of Tarantino's action smorgasbord. The highly underrated 16th James Bond adventure License to Kill with the brilliant Timothy Dalton as 007 makes my list of favourites. Another classic from the Disney Renaissance of the 1990s next, the one that had it all, The Lion King. Another classic indie flick from the 2000s next with the brilliantly written Little Miss Sunshine. The final part of the original trilogy, Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, is next. Recently reviewed on this channel as the film is 20 this summer, it's sci-fi mindbender The Matrix. Next, the strongest of the 6 Mission Impossible adventures to date is 2018's excellent Mission Impossible Fallout. The final show for a Charlie Chaplin film on my list, and the first film of his I had the pleasure of watching whilst studying film at university. It's the 1936 classic Modern Times. Next up is the film that won Charlize Theron her Best Actress Oscar for her unrecognisable transformation into serial killer Aileen Wuornos in Monster. Before If Beale Street Could Talk, director Barry Jenkins brought us the sublime Moonlight. Still one of my favourite performances from the late Robin Williams, as you'll see in an upcoming video on the channel. Mrs. Doubtfire also happens to be one of the most quotable and enjoyable films of all time. The best character Hugh Grant has ever played next is William Thacker in the feel-good Notting Hill. Carol Reed's musical adaptation of Dickens' classic Oliver is up next on our list. The next outing from the Bond series on my favourites list is the single entry starring George Lazenby on Her Majesty's Secret Service. One of Jack Nicholson's finest performances next in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Next is another brilliant, thought-provoking narrative from director Christopher Nolan, starring Hugh Jackman and Christian Bale, The Prestige. Following this is another Hugh Jackman vehicle, this time in Denis Villeneuve's blistering Prisoners. What favourite films list would be complete without Hitchcock classic Psycho? Tarantino's masterwork Pulp Fiction is up next. Documentary-style horror next, with the claustrophobic, genuinely terrifying first instalment in the Wreck series. 2019's superb Rocket Man is up next, one of the strongest music biopics to date, looking at the career of Elton John. The movie that won Brie Larson her Best Actress accolade next, which also showcases Jacob Tremblay as a young actor to watch closely. It's the amazingly affecting Room. Up next is a family film I grew up with and it still holds up today, Agnieszka Holland's beautiful adaptation of Frances Hodgson Burnett's The Secret Garden. Another brilliant and worthy winner of the Best Picture is Guillermo del Toro's The Shape of Water, a love letter to the movies and the art of movie making. Two Stephen King adaptations back to back here with 1994's Shawshank Redemption and The Shining. Jonathan Demme's immaculate adaptation of Thomas Harris's The Silence of the Lambs is next. The last film from the musical genre to feature on this list is the vintage Gene Kelly vehicle Singing in the Rain. The only appearance from M. Night Shyamalan on this list, it's his directorial debut, The Sixth Sense. The last Bond film to feature on this favourites list is 2012's 50th anniversary triumph, Skyfall. Another top feel-good movie next, it's Danny Boyle's Slumdog Millionaire. Next up, we have the first two instalments in the Terminator series, the first movie and Terminator 2 Judgment Day, both classics in their own rights. Next up is Shane Meadows' superb This Is England. Still one of the greatest animated movies of all time, it's the original Toy Story. The Coen brothers make their only appearance on this particular list with their interpretation of True Grit from 2010. We already said earlier this year that this is Jim Carrey's greatest performance. It's Peter Weir's essential Truman Show. Another appearance for James Stewart on my list, well, he is one of my favourite actors of all time, in Hitchcock's breathtaking Vertigo. It floored me when I watched it first time, and it remains the best of the Apes films. It's the concluding chapter, War for the Planet of the Apes. Our penultimate entry on this list goes to director Robert Zemeckis' Hitchcock-inspired thriller What Lies Beneath, which gives audiences two great performances from Harrison Ford and Michelle Pfeiffer. And finally, for this particular list of 100 favourites, we have Damien Chazelle's brilliant Whiplash. J.K. Simmons' performance is one of the most memorable in recent years. And those are just 100 of Crawford-Clark Close-Up's favourite films. I'm not expecting many to agree with all the films I've mentioned here. As I said at the beginning of the video, it's all subjective. Let me know your thoughts on the list and your own favourites in the comments below. And as I said at the beginning of the video, if you enjoyed our special 100th video, please subscribe to the channel at the top of the page in order not to miss out on any new content we publish. Coming later this month, we'll be bringing you our ranking of all Quentin Tarantino's filmography to date to coincide with the release of his latest, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and also in memory of the unforgettable Robin Williams on the 5th anniversary of his passing, we're bringing you our top 10 Robin Williams performances. Make sure you don't miss that. Thanks once again if you're a subscriber to the channel for following my videos over the last year, and please do recommend this channel to others who love talking about movies and TV shows, past and present. Thanks for watching, and here's to many more reviews. Until next time, that's a wrap.